Okay, so David, let's hear a little bit about who is David Roomy
Who is David Roomy?
in your own words.
In my own words. It's interesting. I'll start with where I am today. I'm 83 years old, and I come from a part of the United States where I was born called Appalachia. And
What state?
in the States.
Oh, no, which state?
West Virginia.
Ooh, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains, right?
That's in Virginia, yes. But I've lived in New York City, and my family and I lived in England and in Washington State, just south of here, and now in Vancouver for the last 30 years. So I've tried to acquire some interesting experience having moved like this, which it's interesting to me, and I hope it will be interesting to you. I spent my life as a psychotherapist. I followed the guidance of Carl Jung, C.G. Jung, and he was one of the pioneers of psychoanalysis or analytical psychology. And it's interesting just to pause about him for a minute. He and one other person are probably the most important people to start the bridge between Asia and Europe and America. He was friends with a man who lived in China, and this man who lived in China took it upon himself not only to learn Chinese, but to study with a master. And through a series of lucky events or meaningful chance, he ended up as a student as a student of a man who was the master of the I Ching, And when this man translated it into German first, then he gave Jung a copy, and it really opened Jung's eyes. Jung wrote the foreword to the translation of the book. But that was back in the early 1900s. And it was a major discovery for East and West, both ways, you know. And I like that about Jung. I'll mention something else about him later, which is similar to this. But so that was my vocation, I'm going to call it, psychotherapy. And I did a master's degree in religion and psychiatry. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, but what this refers to is not so much psychology, but to treatment methods, active treatment methods for people, and so forth. So that's sort of my geographical and academic background. I have a lovely wife and three children, and it's a pity she can't be here. I find myself following little tangents a little bit, so I'm going to take this tangent and tell you about her. Her name is Cynthia McNider, and she's named for her grandmother, who was a doctor to the Indians. Sorry, to use that phrase, I meant to say indigenous people in North America, and would hold a summer hospital out on the plains in North Dakota. And the people would come from upwards of 200, 300 miles to get treatment. And she also, during other times of the year, Cindy's grandmother, Cynthia McNider, Cynthia Pingree McNider, during the other months, she would ride out and make house calls all over the territories. And recently, Cindy and I ran into an article from the New York Times which describes her grandmother at that period.
Wonderful.
Because they were trying to raise money for her hospital and so forth. So that's the Times lended its hand. A reporter did. Now I've told you everything that's important. I've told you about my wife.
Yeah. So, how's growing up in West Virginia?
Well, you came to an interesting point. It was like growing up in an unmodern century. West Virginia was a remote area. There were no major highways through there. It was just small country roads. And the people liked it that way because the isolation gave them a sense of freedom. They could think what they wanted to, believe what they wanted to, and pretty much do what they wanted to. But this gave me a perspective on the world that I then entered when I was in my late teens, when I started to do a lot of travel. And so I confronted what we called modernism quite late in my life. I grew up in a community that wasn't that different from the old country, whichever old country it was. And that's been important to me because I went through modernism. I studied in the university and graduate school and all that. And I realized that I was fortunate to have had another life experience than modernism. For example, I taught in a school. It was a Quaker school and a college. And one of my students had never operated a Hoover. She'd grown up in the suburbs. Well, that wasn't true of me. And but going with modernism has given us some of the problems we have with our world today, because it puts a high value on rationality and reductionist science and rationality, and this denies pretty point blank a lot of the fundamental things that people have always thought always mean 2 million years. And since the 1700s in the Western world, we've turned our back on all of that, regarded it as superstitious and not scientific. But we threw out the baby with the bath, basically, because those ideas and beliefs had developed over the millennia, and they reflected people's gradual experience of what it means to be alive and to be in community with other people and to be ethical. And so there's a jump there now to something allied to that, and that is DNA. Because now we can access the sort of conditions, the history, and the people, the individuals who lived through all these changes, going all the way back. Now, in the old cultures of the world, I'm just going to name 3, China, India, and Greece, these records have been kept. I'm thinking now, especially of the ancestry records kept in China and in India. But the Greeks were still doing some of the cultural things which were not based on patriarchy, but still on matriarchy, up until about 1700 BC in Crete. Now this is remarkable because the way the movement of people had happened, patriarchy got the wheel and the carriage or the cart, and with this they were able to be warlike and conquer people and move from, let's say, Mesopotamia over into Europe and stuff. I realize I'm getting a little bit around, but I bring these ideas back together because when Richard Wilhelm, the Chinese gentleman, studied the I Ching with a master, and Carl Jung wrote the introduction to his book, the West began to know a little bit more about the East. And this was an eye-opener, to say the least. So Carl Jung called his view the collective unconscious. And by that he meant that there are images, not words, but images that are in this old psyche of ours, which date back to early practices of humanity. And they happen to be universal. They don't look exactly the same, but it's like the same motif, like the mother or the father as an archetype. And so this gave us an intellectual basis to be able to say human beings are different in all these cultures, but they have the same earth. They have the same earth mother. They have the same experience of first making fire and, blah, 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 years and years in the past. And so in the last couple of years during COVID, I have been studying ancestry and DNA, and specifically my own ancestry. And I feel like that the DNA, the genome, is similar to the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious are the images that appear in our dreams and in our history, like some languages were originally images, almost all probably. And that's the way people thought. And so we can see that we are really all connected. And that's a marvelous thing to focus on and try to implement in one's life. And it does produce the quality of equality. And equality is a value that has yet to be realized.
Yeah. Are you still growing and changing?
Well, I think how do I look to the future, and also how am I growing and changing, are expressed during COVID in the isolation that COVID creates for older people like me. I had time to do major research, and I see that this research is going to be ongoing for me. But the part of the ongoing part of it is that I gained perspectives that I could never have gained otherwise.
Do you want to elaborate?
Yes, one major perspective was that when I was growing up in Appalachia, the people of West Virginia were considered to be backward and somewhat uneducated and so forth. They were cut off from parts, but in effect, they had chosen that. But stereotypes developed. And these stereotypes were even brought out in places like the New York Times, which I mentioned earlier, of a stereotype that's very negative. It has the image of the hillbilly, maybe the moonshiner, things like this. And I realized when I came out of West Virginia that people were confronting me. They didn't say anything about it, but they were confronting me as the stereotype. It was subtle, you know. But I had that. I have had that in the course of my life. For example, I was applying for jobs in Boston once, and I was living in England, but I'd come back to West Virginia to apply for these jobs. And so I was sending out resumes from West Virginia to Boston. And I'm sure none of them were ever opened for the universities that I was applying to, you know, because Boston has 500 colleges and universities. And so, but it's these subtle things, but I've carried them in myself. But when I got into ancestry, I found out important things that I could really value in my past. And one of those things was that in my maternal line, my grandfather, Edward Everett White's ancestry, straight up for many generations, there was a line of 4 or 5 generations of Quakers. Now, hold that idea there just for a minute and realize that 50 years ago, I applied to work for a Quaker college. It's called Friends World College. It had centers in all over the world, all the continents. And it was to expose young people to a genuinely transcultural sense of belonging and belonging with others. So I was attracted to this 50 years before I knew that it was in my family. And I found this quite amazing. And there's a man, Henry Louis Gates Jr., who is revolutionizing what Americans feel about themselves, because he's, over the last 8 years on the public broadcasting system, PBS, his programs are usually on Tuesday nights, he has interviewed, I guess hundreds of movie stars and famous entertainers. And to a person, man or woman, they seldom know anything about their ancestry. But when Henry Louis Gates focuses his resources as a geneticist and a professor at Harvard, he uses genealogy, family history, but he at the end of the program he brings in DNA. Now this is very interesting because always before we've been limited to family history, but DNA reveals surprises. Every one of these people who comes on the program gets a surprise from DNA. They're not actually who they thought they were. And it's usually that they're more diverse, that they have a mixture of background and a mixture of places in the world and a mixture of cultures. But Henry Louis Gates Jr. feels that there are traits in these people present today that they can trace back to the stories of their ancestors. So I feel we're on pretty solid ground here, and I myself have found this, and for one small thing, but it's also a big thing, it enabled me to realize that my ancestry was broader than the stereotype of the person from Appalachia. And that, in fact, that I had whole cultures and histories behind me. People with values like the Quakers. I'm bringing in a religious group because because I want to be clear at the outset that I'm not proselytizing. I have no interest in anyone else being a Quaker or convincing anybody else. I think we all have to have religious freedom, and the Quakers believed that. They were persecuted for that, killed for that in England. So they represent the value of freedom, but they also represent the value of equality. Quakers married Cherokee Nation people. They, in a Quaker meeting that I attended when I lived in England, there was a plaque there on the building that said Thomas Paxton, and Thomas Paxton was married to a Quaker family, and he attended that meeting, and he had enough chutzpah that he, because of his position generally in Parliament, that he could introduce the bill that stopped slavery in the British Empire. Now, these principles came out of that sense of equality and so forth, and freedom. I think I'll pause there and see if you have someplace you want to take us next.
Yeah, I just want to hear more about the new gained perspective since we're talking about changes. We've heard about like you finding out your Quaker roots, but I also just want to hear the other new perspectives that you might be finding about yourself. Yeah.
Well, I'm a psychotherapist, and I've discovered one of the most recent trends in psychotherapy, which I'm not the first to discuss or discover, but I discovered them before I became aware of other people who were doing this. But they were showing that what I had experienced in my own acquaintance with my ancestry was therapeutic. It was like a therapeutic modality to find out who you are, where you came from, what your ancestors did and thought. It's revolutionizing. It's very expansive. And so...
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cherokee.
This thing of equality is a subtle bugaboo for many people, including myself. I have stereotypes. I have limited, slightly narrow views of some other people. But I'll give you an example of how this has changed me, because I have, in this ancestry thing, I followed my maternal line. It's not just what my grandfathers did. It's who the women that they were with were, and what they engendered in their children, and so forth. But as you know, this is a time in which there is this kind of fluidity in male-female perspectives. And I think what I have discovered speaks to that, because it speaks to the fact that I have to get more used to the role of women, roles of women. I have to get more used to what women have to offer in society and in government. Blah blah blah. I have to grow up. I'm an old timer in many ways, because this is the world I inhabit, where people are still split on this issue of the value of women. They're very split. And right now in the United States with Roe versus Wade, we have a dangerous trend, in my opinion. So if I change a little bit, let's say in regard to my wife, let's say the things that I listen to her point of view about more, the things I let go of what I think and consider what she thinks. These are just daily things, but they're mammoth in importance. So this is another place where ancestry is similar to, the study of it is similar to a therapy, because one does change. A major way I've changed, we came out in the program we had yesterday, because I told people about a poem that I had written 5 years ago about the Musqueam people, the First Nation people of the Vancouver area, which, as one of the former chiefs pointed out to us, it shouldn't be called Vancouver because he just stumbled onto it here, whereas it should be called Musqueam. I mean, these are like big perspectives, right? But we're stuck with our modernist, narrow views, in which we don't let in the past, we don't let in values. The principal value of modernism today, I'm starting to be a little bit forceful here, is called maximizing. This is accurate. This is the principal value. And what does that mean? That means getting bigger, maybe more money, maybe more power, maybe more prestige, maybe more control over other people. Maximizing, But that's a very dangerous value if it's a principal value of a culture. And you could say that it's a subtle and not so subtle principal culture of modernism in the United States.
The way that was displacement, I guess.
You're right. Those are too big a categories to say they really are opposed to each other. What is opposed is, I think, that me and my people are right. Me and my people are right. And now, is that modernism? Well, if you look at the world today and the conflicts, you'll see that a very large number of populations and cultures and military complexes believe that. We are right. And that's modernism in the sense that it denies that we have a history of trying to honor the rights of people. This is something it's taken us years to come from Magna Carta to anything like representative democracies, as opposed to oligarchy and autocracy. But there are features of the modern world that are autocratic. They're right there in the center of things. You know, so it's a kind of. It's not that we have been rational. We had to go that way too, but it's that we've become too denying of things that are not completely rational. Now, it's not completely rational that a person has feelings of warmth toward another person. It's not really rational. You don't arrive at that by being rational, I don't think. Or a narrow rationalism, that is. So there is a sense in which the present world is pretty far away from the collective wisdom of humanity. If we could get back to that and see that it's better to make peace than to make war, blah, 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 you know. This is what I'm trying to suggest. I'm not being anti-rational. I'm just saying if it's only rational, and if it is too reductive, that it can spoil our humanity.
Yes.
I continue to be a poet. I continue to do some drawing and some work with paints. And I try to expand my mind through learning more about music and being affected by music. And I'm engaged with a close friend who's a filmmaker on storytelling. And of course, storytelling is one of the images that appear in Vancouver Arts Colloquium Society.
VAX, Vancouver Arts Colloquium Society. Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful. Just say VAX, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, from now on, I'll be VAX.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's learn a little bit more about how you discovered poetry and, you know, like this kind of cloud of, you know, other artistic endeavors.
Yeah.
Like, poetry seems like your main thing, right? I want to say.
It's the main of what I would call my arts. Yes. It's interesting, but poetry is a subdivision of writing, and as you said, I have written some books, and when I was living in New York, I was 23 years old, and I was in a graduate school, but I thought I should leave graduate school, go to California, and become a writer. And now, at 23 years old, I didn't have a lot of life experience. But there's a core there, because eventually I reached it another way. And how it actually came up was that I told my first Jungian analyst, a woman by the name of M. Esther Harding, a doctor, a psychiatrist in New York, that I wanted to be a writer. And she says, well, you know, if you write down your dreams every night, you'll develop your writing. And
Fascinating.
so that was the kind of methodology. And I've been doing that every night and musing on them the next day for 60 years.
For 60 years?
Yeah.
So.
And that helped me become a writer.
Esther Harding?
Huh?
M. Esther Harding?
M. Esther Harding, MD, yeah.
Fascinating.
She was one of the pioneers of the Carl Jung movement.
Huh.
One of the first analysts.
Pause for a second, please.
I'm going to jump to the present moment.
Just wait till then.
What?
Okay.
Okay.
And this is a dream from last week. Let's see, what is today? The 27th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, last week. So I had this dream that that involved a person coming to me on a major holiday, and it was the solstice. But when I woke up that morning, I had no idea that it was actually that morning as the solstice. And I hadn't even placed it in my visualization of the calendar, when to expect it or what to look forward to, or it wasn't in my rational mind at all. But I think there's the possibility that I tuned into something that has been one of the most pivotal awarenesses of human beings since the beginning of time. You know, with the creation of these sanctuaries that register the first appearance of the new year and so forth, in terms of light. Megalithic cultures, and this cued me into the fact that I have a very old psyche. I'm not unusual in that sense. I think we're all carrying this DNA information. We're all carrying this collective information of what we learned about the basic things, how to survive famine, blah, 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 you know. And so the world calendar, that is the cosmic calendar as far as the earth is concerned, is contained within my own collective unconscious. Now that bespokes of your question, where do I go from here? Okay, I'm 83, I don't have a job, I don't have to do a job, and I can do things like artwork and dream work and so forth, and creative work, the creative. And the creative for me is letting myself learn from my dreams, perspectives that are miles beyond what I would ordinarily think. You know, if somebody had told me that, you're going to dream of this, in the dream it's going to be the solstice, and in the actual calendar it's going to be the solstice, I would have thought, you know. Yeah.
Would have been something else.
So that's the sort of exploration that I want to do. I have a little bit of skill in it because I've worked on dreams all these years, and I've worked with other people's dreams, of course, and I've trained people in psychotherapy. But it's very humbling because one day is, in a sense, just like the next. You wake up and there's your routine. You have certain things you do the first thing in the morning and blah, blah, blah. And you might not be aware that you just had a dream that was earth-shaking. That opened up vistas. So I hope to live to be an old age. It's one of the things I found out about my ancestors is that many of them lived into their 90s and sometimes into their 100 years of age. Many, many of them. Now, I don't know if I have that gene or if I have that fortune or fate, if you will. And I certainly can't claim that I know I'm going to do that because I don't know that. But I would like to because it would give me time to have more of these realizations. You could call them the sort of things that people experience when they see a sunset or when a synchronicity happens to them. Something that's sort of beyond immediate explanation, but seems to connect them with the depths of things. But these things are available to us all. And young people are catching on. Young people are catching on that we're a planet that may die as such, and that we have to fess up to that. That has to be number one. And the First Nations people have always had that perspective, that we are part of nature. We're not only able to control nature, and we have to learn from nature. I think I first wrote my first poem. I was on a train, and I had been to San Francisco as a part of a year I spent in traveling in the west of the United States. And a friend had taken me to the beat area, where the Beats lived, and where poets like Lawrence Ferlinghetti was one of the Beat poets. And I liked his poetry, and it was totally different, something new. And so I think it inspired me to write a love poem on the train. And so I've kept at it. One of the things about this is this is available to everybody, and everybody has such experiences. It's not as if this is rare or special. But people are affected by nature. People have a sense of words being beautiful, even though they haven't studied the outlines of poetry, and some languages are still images to this day. And those images are very rich.
Yeah.
We in the West, we have to go to an etymological dictionary to find out what were the images that made up the word manifest, let's say.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming in pictorial languages that the image is already there.
Yeah. So,
Is there sort of an artistic experience that a person who wants to do something of beauty in whatever form, paints or words or whatever, if they realize that they're getting something that they should transcribe. They should take a moment off doing things and just concentrate on what's coming to them. It sounds very simple, but I'm sure they're
Just kind of stop what you do and just kind of write.
yeah. And during the night, I don't try to write down the dreams, but I write down a little clue that when I wake up in the morning, with that one little clue, the whole dream will come back. I'm fascinated by creativity in its many manifestations. And Vax has a good point that it's stressing that art can be a place where this broader perspective can come through, that it's somewhat out of the reach of immediate reason.
Yeah.
Now, turning that into a painting or a poem can involve reason again. You know, there are levels of in and out of this deeper reality, you know.
Just behind that.
Well, it's interesting
The
because
story you have about that. Yeah, sorry.
the poem begins with my looking out of this tower here over the Musqueam Reserve, which is just a short ways away from here. And I guess that I'd already start thinking about being involved in Keiko Honda's, she's the president of VAX, her project bringing together Musqueam youth and University of British Columbia students. But then just unfolded to me kind of like, it wasn't exactly automatic writing in any way, but the ideas occurred to me. I'm on their land. This land was never conveyed to those of us who live on it now, or our landlords, by the indigenous people themselves. There was no treaty.
And how did you come across that realization?
Well,
Did
I've
something
been,
trigger it?
huh?
Did something trigger it? Or was it just the kind of contemplation?
It just came. It's like flowed. It just flowed. I mean, this is a major point of view in the province we live in Canada, in British Columbia. That how did we get this land, and what about the people who lived here 10,000 years?
Yeah, exactly.
Were there ever any terms in which we got it?
Especially in British Columbia, where many of the land is not, ceded. Yeah.
Yeah. So these perspectives are out there, you know. And some of my memories from childhood, I remember finding as a boy an arrow, an actual indigenous person's arrow. Boy, that was special. And you're like, wow. So it's been with me a long time, these perspectives of feeling for indigenous people and realizing that their rights have been denied, they've been abused. Well, when the first time I read it was 5 years ago, and it was at the community center of the Musqueam community. And so the majority of the audience were members of the band. And I didn't know how they would take it. There's a trend in writing, and writers are being very critical of sort of taking over other people's cultures and stories and ideas, and getting good books out of it or whatever, movies and that's a trend that writers and other artists are trying to become aware of. And I didn't know what would happen, but I saw the faces of some of the young people, and they sort of softened, and Deborah Sparrow herself, the famous weaver, was in the audience, and she and I made a contact, and I realized that we were together, on something. It wasn't that she was this and I was that. It was that we were both human and capable of human feelings. I had a lot of, I'm not going to call it nervous energy, but there was a big build-up to coming. And you speak of things like this in yourself, and it's true of all of us. If you know that standing before other people and putting oneself out there, I mean, are they going to like me? Are they going to dislike me? Are they going to understand me or even misunderstand me? But it's necessary to take the risk.
Yeah.
You took a lot of risks yesterday
Thank you.
in your role of being one of the MCs of the event.
Thank you.
And it endeared you to people. People really responded to it.
How did it feel to you afterwards, You know the feeling before, but...
Well, I'm going to put it simply. There were about 30 people there, I think. And there was a rousing applause. And I felt that applause, that they meant it. I felt it wasn't just polite, well, we have to do this at the end of things. It seemed enthusiastic to me.
Yeah.
So I felt very good about that. Like we had connected. We reached some common understanding. If you consider Western art, it was influenced by things in Japan and other cultures. And they started whole new openings of artistic perspective.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you were going to continue on. Yeah.
Well, I'm not. I didn't. Nothing else came.
It's okay. It's okay. But
Well, I was going to mention that we had in our midst a young woman who was a representative that day of the Musqueam people, and she told the group that she was not only Musqueam but also Fiji.
Vax has done an interview with her, Grace Ulu. Yeah.
Yes, you just had an interview with her.
Oh, I think it was 2 weeks ago. Actually, yeah. We've been previously acquainted. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she had us as a group approach taking what had been a painting, but it had been cut up in little squares, enough for all of us to have a little square. And we were supposed to go away and react to that little piece of what it was with our own ingenuity. And then she brought it back together and it made a painting. And so this is a wonderful example. It's a perfect example of what you were looking for. A couple of them come up, and I haven't spoken yet today about the fact that I discovered that I, as a somewhat modern person, have actually indigenous blood. I haven't told that today, have I?
You have it.
So that came as a great surprise to me, and a wonderful surprise. And it pleased my youngest daughter, because she was wondering why I was spending all this time doing ancestry. She just wasn't into it, But when I found that there was some connection with indigenous people, she was really thrilled. And
Thrilled in what way?
well, she's a person. She's sort of a generation and a half younger than me. She was born when I was 30. And she and her daughter, my one grandchild with my wife, are very emotionally and practically involved in saving the planet. She had sent me for my birthday present a book by a First Nation person who's also a biologist, and who brought together attitudes that First Nations people have that would support taking a different perspective toward industrial development, let's say, technological development, whatever. In a way, the indigenous people are the key to saving the planet. Because it's attitudes. It's attitudes that make a difference. Am I all that's important? Is my family all that's important? Are there things that transcend me? And
Yeah.
there are, and of course. And the First Nations people lived as if that were true, as I understand them. They weren't perfect either, but they have something to offer us today.
Yeah.
Do I feel it's so important today? Oh yes, thank you. I do think Jung was one of the seminal thinkers for the modern Western world, and he connected us to the non-Western, the Eastern and the Southern world. What he did was he let himself drop into his experience. And he, after his death, a book was published called The Red Book. It's pretty famous, and it was Jung let himself drop into the collective unconscious. And this was a harrowing experience. No one had ever done just exactly that. But I would call the unconscious, the psyche, the wellspring of human generativity, creativity, capacity to imagine new things. Jung is also, is the most important thinker, I guess, in my life. I think he pointed to the next age. He's not the only one, but he pointed to the Age of Aquarius. Of course, on Broadway they did that in the 60s. This is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. And, but what does that mean? And he thought it was quite important because he realized that in the West, we had started with ideas that there was good and bad. There was up and down. There was so forth, with a binary perspective. And I feel we're still in that perspective today as a whole.
Yeah.
We still think some people are good and some people think the right thing, and some people are bad, and some people think the wrong thing, and we're the good ones and they're the bad ones.
Yeah.
And Jung would call that the projection of the shadow, because he would say that we all have a mixture of human traits in us, light and dark. And only when I can accept that I have the dark in me, really know that, first-hand experience, then only then can I be less likely to project something thought to be negative on another person or another culture. So I think he's a pivotal, seminal thinker for the modern world. And the water bearer, the Aquarius, you see, our age is Pisces, the two fishes. It's two things, and it's right through our history. And Aquarius is a unitary symbol, and he's the water carrier. But I'm still searching for the meanings of this symbol.
Yeah.
It's not binary.
Yeah, for sure.
It's not two things. It's not, and water, after all, is the symbol of the well springs of life, and the ocean, the basis of our nature, human nature. Well, I think the artistic process is a psychological unfolding. I mean, it is that itself. It's letting go and letting things come to you. Well, my very favorite college course was given by a woman, Miss Shirley, and it was called the Interrelation of the Arts. And that's where she tuned me in to how in each epoch the arts are similar. They're talking about similar dynamics. The poets are talking about it, and the painters are painting it, and so forth. And the musicians are giving it sound. Their arts are interrelated. And so that sort of sparked something in me. And I did sort of do creative work in that course in my senior year of college. So that the arts were definitely forwarded and pivotal in my college education. That was the best course I had ever attended.
And like, what did you create in that course?
The students were asked to do some creation of their own.
So,
And what was it I did,
Yeah.
if I can remember?
It's a little amorphous.
I know. I'm trying to remember. I remember it had to do with writing that kind of unfolded. I'm not going to say it's poetry or something like that, but it was writing that came from inside. It had the experience of letting it flow. And real appreciation for beauty. That beauty was one of the greatest things. And beauty doesn't have a specific message.
Yeah.
It's not a concept, you know? But if we can give ourselves to beauty, then we become a little more beautiful.
Yeah.
And I went through that process in that course. And I was recognized, like a lot of other students, by Miss Shirley as being affected by her course and what she had acquainted us with.
That's wonderful.
You know,
Yeah, could you repeat that beauty line again, if you don't mind?
beauty line.
Oh, I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, we're sorry.
You had a line about, like, I'm so sorry, I got a little distracted.
No, it's okay. No, it was something like, well, beauty is an experience. It's not a concept, and it's an experience that moves us. We move on to be something more complete by the experience of beauty. It creates a sense of awe in us. And awe is considered an aspect of religious experience. I had a very good teacher in psychotherapy by the name of Arnold Mendel. And he's known for something called process-oriented psychology or process work. And I studied that, was trained in that by him, and received a certificate to conduct it myself. He was a Jungian analyst, and he brought together psyche and body. He realized that people receiving body work had psychological experiences. And the body workers were talking about it. What do we do when they start telling us about things that are...
So what is a body worker?
A body worker is a masseuse, a physiotherapist, Jinshen Jutsu is a Japanese. You're familiar with that?
No.
Okay. Well, it's a Japanese form of acupressure.
Yeah.
I've had 2 years of that as a client. It was an amazing expansion of my awareness.
So let's continue on with the earlier point because I don't want to get too, off topic.
Okay.
You're talking about Arnold Mendel and the process-oriented psychology.
Yes, and will you remind me of the question? I'm sorry.
So I guess how you came across writing. Why did you start writing?
Oh, okay, good. Well, there's just a very particular story there, because I was working with people who were regarded as chronically mentally ill, and in the part of the training program, I told Arnie about that, and he said, "Why don't you write about that?" And so I did, and I showed it to him. And through a series of good fortunes, or luck, or synchronicities, my book got picked up with a number of books that he was writing on body psychology, somatic psychology. It was very popular in the 70s. And my book got picked up with the same group and were published by Penguin Arcana in England.
It's fascinating.
And they asked him what he thought about it. He told me, and he said, "Yeah, go ahead."
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
And yeah, what kind of made you keep on writing?
Well, then after that, let's see. After that, I was doing group work myself, and I had a group, my training group in this place in one of the states went on for 10 years. It's actually still active today. This is 30 years ago, somebody. But in that group, there were such deep experiences of the people. Because, let's say, let me describe a piece of process work. Okay, in a training setting. So the people are coming there to, they're already professionals of some kind. And the training is subjecting yourself to the process. So a person is invited to work in the middle, let's say with Arnold Mindell. And so in that process, their own process really evolves. That is, things start to happen spontaneously, and they're kind of like on the edge of things. Like, I don't already know about this. This is the unknown. This is slightly scary. I'm not directing this drama. But it turns out that this is the psyche trying to bring about balance. This is the psyche revealing the part of us that's beyond the modernist perspective of things, that is creative, original, earth-shaking, scary, not consensus culture, not consensus culture. Here I am, a person, I'm not consensus culture.
So what made you keep on writing?
Okay, well, you see, once these things were happening in my groups, then I had another subject to write about. I had not case histories of people with chronic mental illness, but expansive stories that unfolded in the training groups, and that I was part of it. I mean, I was taking part in it myself with them. And literally, these people are my friends to this day. And some of my closest friends, I write to them, and they write to me. Because we lived through something together that changed us. That's the thing about process work or Jungian psychology. The therapist changes too. The therapist is involved in a process with another person that they're affecting each other, and they're both going beyond the bounds of their usual perception of things. So that was a reason to write the second book. I'm going to tell you about the third book.
Okay.
The third book is called Muslims Like Us, meaning they are like us, meaning Westerners. And this was written right after 9/11, because I realized that people in America were going to demonize people of the Islamic faith.
And they did.
And they did. And I wanted to do something to counter that, to present another alternative. And so I wrote this book, and I showed how from Muslim literature, the tales of the 1001 Nights well, this is, some Muslims would not consider that, they would consider that secular. But the people of that region, including the Arabs, these Tales of the Thousand and One Nights revealed a cultural background that was akin to, comparable with, parallel to our Western culture. So they are like us. But the book also mentions at the end that one of the reasons for using that title is that they like us. And now I'm talking about the United States and, let's say, the Arab world for the moment. And we have a demonstration of that because of the Arab Spring that happened in so many countries. That's because they like us. But we weren't smart enough to, we didn't get the whole thing. And we had divisive thinking. We had splitting thinking, them and us. We had a paranoid fantasy. They have weapons of nuclear destruction. That's paranoid.
Yeah.
It's just directly pathological. Or maybe it's just political. Maybe it's just contrived.
Yeah.
You know?
There's a mix of it. Yeah.
And so how are people being manipulated? And how many people died? I mean, millions of people in Iraq. And the country is in shambles, probably will never recover. And the United States will probably never recover from its destructive acts. Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Vietnam, Iraq, Northern Africa.
Laos. To name a few.
So we have to realize that we are the problem. We're the persons who should be soul searching. If we're incapable of being soul searching and realizing that we are part of the problem, if not the problem, if we don't get to that point, then we'll continue to be destructive. And we will persecute minorities and immigrants and people of different color and different cultures. The other.
The other. Yeah. Edward Said's other, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's really insightful. Thank you.
There's one more book to tell you about.
Okay.
I don't want to leave this one out because part of your program has been around arts, and my final book is a collection of my poetry, and it's called. It's also has a cultural spin. It's called Spirit and Flesh, Englishman and Greek, and it takes the idea from the great movie Zorba the Greek. You haven't heard of it, I know. You're the wrong generation. Not the wrong generation, but it's too far from the original. But Zorba the Greek was a man who lived in the flow. And he was with another Greek who was a kind of academic, scholarly. But Zorba the Greek taught the scholar, he said, "Let me teach you to dance, like the Greeks do, the Greek dance." And that's where the music comes from. I was watching a program, a movie this week, an older movie called Papadopoulos and His Sons, and it's about this Greek quality of spontaneity and richness of experience that's not all narrow and consensus culture, you know. So
how did this influence your book? Or
Well,
what drove you to write that, poetry anthology from this kind of experience?
you see, I had always wanted to be a writer. My poetry was the best part of my writing, I thought. And this comes around again to this. It comes around to the beginning of the circle. My grandfather is Greek, and he was born in Cyprus. So I have a Greek soul. They start playing this music, and I come alive. Like I watched this movie last night. I was having the greatest time. You know, because it's a different vision of how to live.
Yeah.
To live, it was summed up in the idea that success, that's more like similar to maximizing, but according to this Greek man, success became joy of living. That's success. That's counterculture.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you so much for sitting down with us, David. I really do want to kind of wrap my head around this, but kind of to put it really directly, what drove you to write that final book of yours, the poetry anthology?
The fact that Plato had these three categories: truth, beauty, and goodness. Truth, beauty, and goodness. And beauty is something that can't be reduced to any other category. It's something in itself. And it's wanting to give yourself to that. Wanting to give your time, your imagination.
There's an inchworm on you, actually. See that? There's a little caterpillar on you, so I'm going to let it crawl onto my pen real quick. So it does it. Sorry about that. Okay. There we go. So it doesn't, So it's okay. Sorry about the distraction?
Well, distractions are sometimes enjoyable.
Anyways,
I liked seeing him struggle, or her. The struggle, it was beautiful. How the whole organism went into focus. I mean, that's us.
Yeah.
I don't have to justify anything about myself to anybody. I can claim that at certain moments in my life, I experienced beauty. I was the receiver of beauty. And those times I was alive. I was awake. Success is joy.
Yeah. Of course, it's not for the money, but
I have over 200, maybe over 250 edited poems. They're polished. And I've always wanted to publish them. Publishing poetry, let's say 10 years ago, was not the easiest thing to do. It's not and a person acquainted me with something called iUniverse, and it's a respectable self-publishing place. Now, in that 10 years, self-publishing has been more and more accepted. And many famous people actually started that way.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I did. They were a good company. I subjected my material to their editors, who were working moonlighting for big publishing companies. So they were real good editors. And so I had a vetting from somebody else that this was okay to do. And so, is this going to be on?
Yeah.
I'm now going to record something about people that I love, that I grew up with, and who are my cousins, distant cousins and close cousins. This is in West Virginia, in Appalachia. And if you look at my high school yearbook, which I've done, my senior class, let's say there were 100 people, you'll see 30 or 40 names there that I've come across since I've been examining my ancestry. There was a lot of intermarriage. It wasn't necessarily incestuous, but it was intermarriage. It's a limited population contained in a bubble, you know, and but that's kind of very interesting because I mean, it's a mark that I do come from this part of the world, and one of the things that I can say about West Virginia people is that they have a dignity to them. And they're not like the general population of the United States, but they have a dignity about who they are. And I have a friend who's a daughter of a senator, and she told me that she used to visit there from Washington, D.C., which isn't very far away. And that's what she said about them. And she said they have dignity and they're warm. And those are still factors that I would aspire to in my life. But I can tell you some funny tales if that's what you're some like. Well, you've heard of the Hatfields and McCoys. Well, my mother's aunt was the sister of Randolph McCoy, the main guy in the McCoy family. So, and on my father's side, I have connections with the Hatfields. And when I was growing up, people talked a lot about this. And I think it's because it gave them some sense of having a place in the world perspective. They were somebody people could say, oh, that we know about them. That fills the McCoys. And I know a lot about them. And my grandmother went to some of the funerals of the Hatfields. This was on my father's side. And my so-called advisor in my youth group in the church was named Coleman Hatfield. And Coleman Hatfield was the son of another Hatfield who was the son of one of the sons of Anderson Hatfield, called in legend Devil Anse. My father, this is a funny story. My father told me the story of playing with the Hatfield boys when he was a child. Now, they lived up, you could say, one of those hollers. They were outside the little hamlet that where I grew up, Logan, West Virginia. But they had a house on the top of one of these mountains, you could say. And my father said that the boys, the Hatfield boys, would take him underneath the crawl space in the house, and it was full of guns.
Full of what?
Guns. And so, there's another story. This is part of the story. My third great grandfather, on my father's side, his mother's side, was a circuit preacher. And he rode around on a mule in Kentucky and West Virginia and got things going. It was called the Second Revival or something like that, second wave of the revivalism. And he formed the church that I grew up in. So I grew up in a church in which there were these wonderful stained glass windows. One of Holman Hunt's Christ Knocking at the Door, and they had the tribute to my great uncle, my father's uncle, who was a direct descendant of the Hatfields. Not a direct descendant, but a descendant. And so I grew up seeing these windows as tributes to the man who started the church on one side, and the woman who was his daughter. Now, she was my great grandmother, Belle. She did not have a formal education. Belle Lunsford was her name, an old English name. She took around food to people who were shut-ins because of being ill. That's what she did with her life. And so people there were very connected to each other. They were like the old communities in England and Scotland, just like that. People knew everybody. Everybody knew my name as a child in a town of 5,000 people. They knew the name of every kid, And that was pretty wonderful. That was pretty wonderful. It was certainly a religious area. Everybody believed in religion, which there was Christianity, and you could say that the church was the most important social envelope for people in the community. For me, that led me into thinking that I was going to become a minister myself. Not a circuit rider on a mule, but to actually go to college and then study for the ministry, which I did. But I found that in my early 20s that what had really attracted me to religion was the inner life, contemplation. And so I did not become a minister of a parish church, a local church, and my life expanded to sort of broader horizons. But the simplicity and the warmth of the people of West Virginia is with me today. I speak to people on the street like I was in my hometown. They don't know me. They don't know what's happening. I feel a little foolish afterwards. My wife says, "Why did you do that?" But so there's positive and negative in all these things, It's
Know about who you are.
That's an extremely good question, and it's been part of my purpose in life is to leave something behind, and I'm leaving behind the videos that Keiko's has made of me, and I'm leaving behind my books. But now I'm leaving behind a record of a family tree which I've culled through 2,500 names to form. And it's revealed that I have a Quaker past, which I didn't know about. It's revealed that through a DNA match, it's revealed that I'm a direct descendant of William White of the Mayflower. It's revealed that I can trace almost name by name back to a man in the year 1015. And I have this on a tree, you know. I made a friend of mine, he was there yesterday, he made copies of these trees for me, and I gave one to my granddaughter, and I gave one to one of my cousins, twice removed or something like that, who just had a baby, and they have these 4 panels, and they're going to be able to give them to their offspring if they have them. Well, one of them has just had 2 children. And so it's like that quote from the Broadway musical Carousel, in which it is stated, as long as one person remembers me, it was worth it.
So what would you want that great grandchild to know about you and what you stood for and what you thought about?
Religious freedom and equality. If you're talking about values.
How would you describe your personality?
I began as an introvert, shy, and in the second half of life, I become more extroverted, more gregarious, and that's sort of the usual pattern that in the second half of life, you develop the things that you shied away from in the first half of life, you know.
And do you have a message for your great-grandchild? What would you like to tell them?
I'm trying to think of a quote from Zorba the Greek. Let me teach you to dance. Yeah. Go with the flow. Be open to experiences that are just unimaginable. Because they're actually there for the taking.
I can't remember. Did you tell me you had some experience in San Francisco in the Summer of Love?
No, I wasn't there with the Summer of Love. I was in before the 60s. I was there in the late 50s, and the Beat Poets, and they're wearing the monks' robes, the hairy garments, and walking around the street reading their poetry in the famous cafe there. Something Lights, what's it called? Yeah, Something Lights, and so that was definitely a broadening experience for me, because I read the poems of Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who was one of the key figures, along with On the Road, and the writer of On the Road. And it was definitely beyond the hills of West Virginia.
Did you actually go to one of those cafes and see?
Oh yeah, yeah. I also went to a black Muslim cafe in Harlem with a black friend of mine, and so these were experiences that I value greatly. I think it was where Malcolm X came often, and I was the only white person. And but my black friend trusted me enough to show me his culture. He wasn't from Harlem, but he was from Chicago. And these have been experiences outside the hills, you know.
So you would have been extremely naive when you left that part of the world as a young man, right?
Well, you see, because I was active in Christian youth, I had already started to travel a lot. And I would spend summers in youth conferences, national youth conferences, and things like this. And I would meet a indigenous American for the first time, you know, and black people, and I traveled across the country with a group, a small group of us officers from West Virginia of our Christian fellowship, and we had a black person among us. We had to be very careful that where we tried to stay. So I knew these experiences.
At this point,
I'm going to quote C.G. Jung on this because he expresses something that's meaningful to me. He was in New York City on a visit, and he spoke to the Jung Club there, and he said, try to live your life as fully as he lived his. And that's much more meaningful to me than the imitation of Christ, or the supposed or aspired imitation of Christ.
so how did he live his life fully then?
He lived it, the fact that he lived it fully is the big thing.
How did he live it fully?
He gave himself over to his ultimate realization about himself, that he was a child of God. Actually, he didn't use that word. He was textual criticism of the New Testament. If he used any phrase like that, it was child of man, which was a current term through Judaism. Child of man.
Son of man.
Son of man. I mean, son of man. Mm-hmm. So it's not fundamentalism I'm talking about. It's not extremism.
So what was Christ's gift to human civilization, would you say?
I think that love was that the fact that he loved people and he urged his followers to love others as he loved them. And love is different than compassion. And Buddhism's main idea, two main ideas, are wisdom and compassion. And Christianity's main idea is love, in my opinion, for me, my interpretation.
Cool. Anything else you'd like to put on camera?
Yeah, there is. Let's see. I'd like to say that I was fortunate to have some psychological problems in my life because I got help, and I thought I was training to be an analyst, but actually it was mostly me that was changing. But that was my training, and I feel like I have made many friends in a kind of therapy, if you want to call it that, in which both the client and the therapist change as a result of what's transpiring between them, and that they both are affected deeply by the other and grow by that. No.
Okay. Anything else?
It's okay. You have a tendency to go to the essence, which is good. It's like,
I talk about
see,
boring things.
oh no, it's that the essence is like, it's hard to get there, but it's worth a lot of chatter that may precede it.
And how do you feel, being much closer to the next world than,
I feel okay about it. I feel if I died tomorrow, that I had realized some of my nature. I had become something of who I am. And I made a lot of friends.
and that's kind of, is that a Buddhist term when you said you realize something of your nature? Or?
No, that's a kind of Jungian term, which amounts to individuation, becoming who you are, which is not only your ego personality, but it's yourself, which is the universal self. It's in all people, you know.
Are you hopeful for the future of human civilization?
I think it's going to be a close call. Have we passed the point of no return? I can't say, but a Jungian analyst affected me by some talks he gave, because he said that we should try to give ourselves over to the possibility that the earth that we know may not be here forever. That's something that should start to work itself around in our mind, and I adhere to that. Although I'm still more optimistic as a person, but I need this realistic perspective that we're at a really dangerous point of degradation.
What do you have to say about VAX? Vancouver Arts Colloquium Society.
VAX, Vancouver Art Colloquium Society, has given me and many other people the chance to meet diverse people in our own community, creative people, ingenious people, good people, and it's how I met you, in essence, and it's a force for the good. Force for the good. I'm proud to be associated with Keiko Honda, the president of the Vancouver Arts Colloquium Society.